They're not going to foul. The Heat will let it play out. It's over. At last, the long wait is over. After 47 years, the Denver Nuggets can finally call themselves NBA champions.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to Basketball in the Mountains. This is episode 29, and it is the free agency edition. As free agency, or the unofficial start to free agency, was yesterday. Recording this on Tuesday, July 1st, about a week after we talked about the NBA draft, the first round specifically. With Jason Walker from Cache Valley, we had talked about the Jazz taking Ace Bailey, all the move the Suns made with getting Kaman Malawach, and trading for Mark Williams on draft night as well. So covered all that stuff in last week's episode if you missed it. And today we are back talking about the other NBA team in the Mountain Time Zone, and the team that I obviously am around quite often in the Denver Nuggets, who have kind of been one of the big winners of the first 24-ish hours now that free agency has been underway, making some moves that we didn't expect, some moves that maybe we could have seen coming. But overall, I mean, it's been a very promising start to free agency and this offseason for the new look Nuggets front office, which we haven't really even talked about too much on this podcast because there's been so much going on. But to break down everything, I've got my colleague Vinny Benedetto from the Denver Gazette. Vinny, how much sleep have you gotten since free agency started, and how have you enjoyed maybe being a little bit busier this time around instead of just reporting on the usual DeAndre Jordan minimum re-signing?
Yeah, I was ready, to type up that DeAndre Jordan news 3 minutes after free agency started, but haven't had to break that one out yet, and I don't know if I will be breaking that one out now. But yeah, as far as sleep goes, I'm operating on a good 5 hours a night with maybe a nap, 30-minute nap mixed in the afternoon.
Well, we'll make sure you can get one in this afternoon after this podcast. But there's no other place to start than maybe the biggest news of yesterday, or the biggest move of the first day, at least. Obviously, the Bucks were trying to steal the spotlight back this morning. But yesterday, it was about an hour or two into free agency. The Nuggets traded Michael Porter Jr. and their unprotected 2032 first-round pick to the Brooklyn Nets for Cam Johnson. Now that trade will probably grow into a multi-team trade with kind of the other move the Nuggets made, which we'll talk about that as well. But Vinny, what was your initial reaction as the Nuggets finally break up the core four here and shake up the like I said, the core of this roster that delivered the first championship in franchise history, but now it's going to look a little bit different going into next season with Cam Johnson coming in to kind of just a clean swap at the 3 spot in the starting lineup with MPJ for Cam Johnson. What was your initial reaction to the trade?
Yeah, initially I was pretty surprised the Nuggets were able to kind of thread that needle because, Brooklyn is one of maybe the only team out there that could really absorb Mike's contract and not have it be a salary matching situation. So I was under the impression that, it'd be a little bit more difficult for the Nuggets to move off of Mike's salary in a trade like that. Obviously that's why the 2032 pick is in there and unprotected, just because, the Brooklyn's doing Denver a favor, taking on that salary and getting back, certainly a more versatile player than Mike. And to your point, a guy who can slot into the starting lineup, and I think will really enjoy playing alongside Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, it had gotten to a point in the offseason because obviously the Nuggets officially kind of reshaped the front office with Ben Tenzer getting promoted, and then John Wallace coming in as kind of like more of a on the player side, I guess you could say, as Ben Tenzer has been like a cap guy for the Nuggets for a long time, and those two guys kind of working in tandem, which you have written about at length for the Denver Gazette, just covering how that tandem will work together. They're able to pull off this kind of trade, which is pretty impressive. But it felt like we had gotten to a point where the core four, or at least the starting lineup for the Nuggets, was going to be staying together for at least going into next season. Because, like you said, it felt like with the amount of teams that did not have cap space, which is just about everybody in the league at this point, that any kind of trade for trade of Michael Porter Jr. was going to have to include the Nuggets taking back a salary that they maybe didn't want to, or as well, you're giving away a bad contract and getting one back in return. But that obviously doesn't happen here with Cam Johnson making, I think, what does he make? A little bit over $20 million next season, and Mike was slated to make about 37, or 38. So you're saving a little bit over between 15 and 20 million, which, like you said, is why the 2032 pick is included there. Which also, I mean, freed the Nuggets up to make plenty of other moves, which is why they were probably more willing to do it. But were you just surprised that at this point that the Nuggets were actually able to make a kind of a big shakeup that felt like it was needed after the end of last season?
Yeah, I don't know if I've said it here yet, but I've kind of been under the impression the Nuggets were kind of going to be forced to run it back to start next season. And, if Mike or Jamal got off to a really strong start and kind of, changed the way people view their contracts, I thought, maybe at the deadline, one of those moves would be made, or certainly a year from now when Mike would be a $40 million expiring contract. I thought, that would be the time they would be able to shake this up. So, yeah, really pretty surprised they were able to make a trade like this that I think, makes the team better, not only on the court, but, to your previous point, really provided some financial flexibility that we've, seen them use in the last 24 hours.
Quickly before we move on to Cam Johnson's fit with the Nuggets, how do you feel like MPJ will be remembered in Nuggets history? I mean, obviously he's been an integral part of this team's really ever since he was drafted. It kind of a fortunate turn of events for the Nuggets, at least, that MPJ had the medical history he did, the medical issues he did, around that time when he was in college for that 1 year at Missouri. Falls to them at number 14 in the draft. They gave him that big extension kind of right away. As soon as he popped right away, and the Nuggets, it felt like an overpay at that point when they gave him that extension, but he became, like I said, an integral part of a team that won a championship. And it's obviously this last postseason was not very good. He had a kind of up and down regular season with some of the highest highs of his career at times during this regular season. But the shoulder injury he suffered in the Clippers series really limited his impact, both in the rest of that series, which they wound up winning, and then obviously in the Thunder series was one of his worst playoff series of his career. I mean, so I think people had the fan base had soured on him a little bit. But do you feel like maybe in a year or 2, 3 years, people will look back fondly on MPJ's tenure with the Nuggets?
Yeah, I hope so, just because I don't know if this is like as well understood as maybe it should be, but like what Mike has to do on a daily basis to like get himself ready to play games and keep his body, I guess flexible and like kind of limber enough for him to play in the NBA, I think required a lot more work than maybe a lot of people recognize. So I think, that's certainly part of it. And just thinking about this season, I think either preseason or early in the season, he told ESPN, if we don't win it this year, they might have to break this up. And to know that's the case, and then he probably also knew, he was going to be top of the list of guys who would potentially be moved if they wanted to split up the core four. So for him to say that, for him to recognize that, and then to injure the shoulder against the Clippers, an injury that would have typically, I think held him out for multiple weeks, if not, a month, if it was the regular season.
Yeah, probably like 4 to 6 weeks in regular season. Yeah.
So for him to kind of put all that to the side and do whatever he could to help the Nuggets in the playoffs, I think it is really pretty honorable and speaks pretty highly of Mike as a person and a teammate. And like, I'm not going to make him out to be this perfect, complete player. Like, there are holes in his game. There are times when, the defense lapsed, or, he was careless with the ball in a clutch situation. Certainly, to your point, had his struggles in the playoffs. But I think, all things considered, I think he gave the Nuggets, just about what he could on a nightly basis. And, this doesn't mean much to the fans, but, with the media, he was always honest about what he was dealing with, and, wasn't one to shy away from blame. So, like you said earlier, it might take a year or two for fans to kind of realize Mike's impact. But, when he's back here with Brooklyn next season, there's going to be a tribute video, and I think he deserves a pretty warm reception whenever that happens.
Yeah, a guy who, like you said, played through plenty of injuries throughout his career and dealt with countless issues off the court too with family members and stuff. So a guy who's been through a lot and kind of grew up during his time in Denver. So I agree. I think whenever that it'll only be one game next year, but when he does Denver to face the Nuggets with Brooklyn, it should be, he should be welcomed back with open arms, I feel like, and that's something that definitely will happen for him whenever we do get the schedule and we find out when he'll be back. But his career also ends, his tenure with Denver also ends with him providing a lot of optimism for the future with the guy that they acquired for him with Cam Johnson. And you said just kind of a seamless fit into the role and maybe a more versatile offensive player than Mike for Cam Johnson. Just kind of, I'm not sure how much you've watched him over the last couple of years. Obviously you probably remember him from Phoenix more than anything, but a guy that's really kind of improved throughout his NBA career, who came into the league as an older player out of North Carolina and was kind of an instant contributor in Phoenix before obviously being a part of the Kevin Durant trade, and then having his best season of his career last year, scoring almost 19 points per game. It's been a really, really good 3-point shooter every year, kind of high 30s percentage or low 40s, even as the attempts per game have risen up over 7, which they were last year. Just how perfect of it feels like a lot of players get better when they get to play with Nikola Jokic, but it feels like Cam Johnson is one of those guys that more than anybody will really, really benefit from playing alongside the Joker.
Yeah, I think a guy like Cam can certainly bank on getting better looks next season than he's gotten at any point in his career. I mean, I'm sure I remember him getting plenty of good looks when he was with Phoenix with a pretty, really strong team there. But these last few seasons in Brooklyn, he's been more of a priority for opposing defenses, and I think that's forced him to kind of expand his game a bit. I was looking at some of his stats, and he's pretty solid in isolation. He can handle in a pick and roll. He can come off, Nuggets run a ton of DHO stuff off of Jokic. I think he's, a solid enough ball handler and a versatile enough scorer to kind of make the most of those situations. And then, when the time calls for it, he's certainly capable of, we saw plenty of Mike standing in the corner, spacing the floor, keeping defenses honest. So I'm sure that's going to be part of Denver's offense as well. And yeah, to your point, I think I just saw a synergy stat where he shot north of 60% on wide open catch and shoot threes last season. So yeah, I think it's going to just, he maybe isn't as elite of a shooter as Michael Porter Jr. just in the catch and shoot standstill situations. But I think he just is going to open up different avenues for Denver's offense to be even better next season.
Yeah, a guy who's got 2 years left on his contract. It's a little bit over $20 million for next season, and then 22.5 for the 26-27 season. So he was on a timeline as MPJ's contract, and now he's, like you said, he's definitely a more versatile offensive player who can handle a little bit more. A guy who got to the free throw line a decent amount last season and was one of the best free throw shooters in the NBA at just under 90%. So. Yeah, it just feels like a perfect fit. I mean, Cam Johnson is a guy that feels like he could play just about anywhere with his skill set and play off of superstars really well. And even, like we said, handled himself pretty well as the top option for Brooklyn last season after they traded Mikal Bridges. So we'll move on from that trade because obviously there was another trade and then some other free agent signings. We'll stick with the trades first, but kind of one of maybe the most stunning move I think of any was the Nuggets trading Dario Saric to the Kings for Jonas Valanciunas. I didn't see anything else from that attached to that trade. The Nuggets, I don't think it was kind of a straight up swap, which is pretty crazy that the Nuggets get off of a player in Dario Saric who is making over $5 million next season after picking up that player option that was pretty obvious he was going to pick up. And now they get back maybe the best backup center they've had in years for a player who they weren't going to play anyway. I mean, is this just a move of magic or a rabbit out of the hat that this new look Nuggets front office was able to pull off here?
Yeah, it feels like it. Kind of like I said about the, Brooklyn was one of the few situations that would take on Mike's contract. It feels like the new Nuggets front office, Ben Tenzer and John Wallace, have done a really smart job of targeting opposing front offices that, are in these situations to, take on these deals that are contracts that don't appear to have a lot of value. Like that Dario Saric whiff, I think, was one of the more costly mistakes of Calvin Booth's tenure. And so you not only kind of rid yourself of a empty roster spot, is effectively what Dario became, but you address a hole that I think was one of the biggest questions the Nuggets needed to answer this offseason, and that's finding a backup big that can play against, true opposing centers. They've got before Dario, they had a group of 3 or 4 guys who were kind of hybrid 4-5s, Zeke, and we haven't seen, much from Deron Holmes yet, but I would put him in that category as well. And I think both those guys are kind of better suited to play the 4 and would probably prefer to play the 4. So I think Jonas gives the Nuggets, an opportunity to probably play those guys at their preferred positions when needed. And, I agree with you that he is probably the best backup center they've had. And you don't need much out of the non-Jokic minutes, and there's not going to be a ton of those minutes for Valanciunas, but I think he's going to give them the best opportunity to just kind of stay level. And I think we've seen this, Jonas do this against the Nuggets, against opposing teams that don't have that true backup 5. He can really be a force for, 4 or 5 minutes at a time. I think there was a game last year where it felt like he had 4 or 5 offensive rebounds in one stint and was just kind of bullying the Nuggets inside when Jokic wasn't out there. So I think it's another probably, A- trade for the Nuggets.
Yeah, a guy who has been a starter in the league for a long time. This past season, he only started 21 games across his. He was with the Wizards to start the season, and they got moved to Sacramento at the deadline. Played 81 games though across the season, and feels like he's moved into the stage now where he's accepted that he'll be a backup. Obviously, that'll be his role on this team. And he's just kind of a regular season innings eater, to borrow a baseball term. He's a guy that you can count on to be healthy, like he has been throughout his career, 81 games last year, 82 games the year before, 79 the year before that, 74. So that's just for a guy who's now well in his 30s and has been in the league for almost 15 years at this point, and has been playing pro basketball for almost 20 years, dating back to his time in Lithuania. It's just a really, really solid addition to the bench, and a guy that we heard Calvin Booth say this at the deadline last year that they felt like DeAndre Jordan was getting a little bit long in the tooth, and the guy that they didn't really feel like could be a guy that could play 80 games in a season, or especially if you're asking him to play even 10, 15 minutes a night, which that's all Valanciunas will be asked to do is 15, maybe 20 minutes a night on nights where Joker gets to sit out, and it's just a really, really solid addition, and kind of one that I wasn't expecting, because like you said, you felt like they were going to have to try to address the backup 5 scenario, but that might have been another minimum guy that they weren't going to be fishing for the Luke Cornettes, or probably not Al Horford. Maybe it felt like that was an option. It seemed like Gershon Yabusele was an option for them too, who's kind of another hybrid 4-5 guy anyway. But this just feels like a home run addition for the Nuggets, for a guy getting Valanciunas, for a guy in Dario Saric that they probably weren't going to play anyway. So moving on to the guys that they did sign in free agency. The first one, which I think everyone kind of saw coming as soon as he made an appearance during the Clippers series, sitting courtside and tweeting during the playoffs that he missed playoff basketball. Bruce Brown is a Nugget once again, after making over $40 million the last 2 seasons, which he parlayed that one season with the Nuggets, helping them win a championship, and being on the court for the end of the Game 5 clincher, which obviously is the intro video today. He parlayed that one great season with the Nuggets into that $40 million over the last 2 seasons, which he signed originally with Indiana, was traded for in the Pascal Siakam trade at the deadline 2 years ago, and then this past year he was a part of the Brandon Ingram trade, right, from Toronto to New Orleans, and it felt like whether it was a minimum or a biannual exception or whatever it was, he was going to probably find his way back to Denver this offseason. He's, Cowboy Bruce. He's kind of embraced that lifestyle, making his way back to Denver at various times, despite not being a member of the Nuggets the last 2 years. But he left as one of the highest approval rating athletes in the city, and it feels like he quickly retakes that mantle, coming back to Denver now on a minimum contract, right?
Yeah, I kind of want them to start him over Christian Brown in the first home game next season, just so we get Bruce Brown in the starting lineup and give the fans an opportunity to show their appreciation. I guess whenever he goes to the scorer's table the first time as well will be another opportunity. But I think it's kind of, I didn't have any inside information on this one, but it did just feel like an easy pairing to reunite Bruce with Denver. I saw he was trying to get back for like the Western Stock Show the last couple seasons. I think he also culturally the city of Denver works for him. The on-court style of play obviously worked for him. And then just in terms of the locker room fit, I think he's a guy who will be a pretty seamless addition. He knows what these guys are about and kind of how he fits into that. So I think it's it's a veteran minimum deal. It's a extremely low risk situation with, I think, the potential to be a pretty high payoff because to your point, the 2 years he spent away from Denver, three quarters of a season in Indiana, I guess a full year in Toronto from trade deadline to trade deadline, and then a tough situation to end last season in New Orleans. I think there were certainly injuries mixed in there. I don't believe he was healthy to start last season. So it feels like just a tough situation the last couple of years for him in terms of acclimating to new situations and trying to see where he fits in, because he is versatile enough that a lot of different teams can use him a lot of different ways. Prior to him being in Denver the first time, like Brooklyn was using him as like a small ball 4. Denver, I think, unlocked something with him as kind of a second unit point guard. So I think, he's been in so many different situations, but, I think the expectations and how he's going to be used in Denver will certainly help him have a better season next year than his 3 stints or 3 stops between stints in Denver.
And just a guy that kind of seamlessly fits back into that backup combo guard kind of role, the guy who can play a little bit backup point guard, but can also play off Jokic as well. Obviously, those guys had a great chemistry in that one season they were together. And I think he's a good fit alongside the other bench guys they have, which now includes Tim Hardaway Jr., which delayed our recording here by about 15 minutes, but glad that happened before we started and not after. But Another minimum deal for the Nuggets was Tim Hardaway Jr., who I looked this up beforehand, but did you know Tim Hardaway Sr. briefly played with the Nuggets? I think he was traded to the Nuggets for Nick Van Exel, and after 14 games retired from his from the NBA before eventually coming back. But nice full circle moment there for the Hardaway family. But this feels like THJ has been a really reliable veteran bench shooter for years now, dating back to his time with Dallas. He was a pretty key piece of the Pistons making the postseason last year and had some memorable moments in that Knicks series. But it feels like another low risk, high reward signing for the Nuggets at the minimum.
Yeah, and I just realized I misspoke earlier. I attributed the 60% on catch and shoot threes to wide open catch and shoot threes to Cam Johnson. That was Tim Hardaway Jr. last year, who. I think is gonna he's gonna get the Jokic benefit, of he's in the past, I think they've kind of staggered some of those guys with, get them some minutes with Jokic, late in the first quarter. So I think, he's gonna benefit from a lot of the open shots. The career 3-point percentage is a little bit lower than I guess I would have anticipated coming in. I think
36%. Yeah.
But again, he's going to be one of those guys who's going to get better looks in Denver than he probably. I'm sure he got a lot of good looks in Dallas playing off of Luka. So I think it'll be kind of, it'll be different but similar enough that he is able to kind of hit the ground running. And he's one of those guys who's going to have like a clearly defined role. He is who he is at this point of his career. He's going to be a bench guy. And I think, he's set up for success in terms of I think he's going to, get an opportunity to play pretty regular minutes and share the court alongside Joker for quite a bit as well.
Yeah, he's a guy that hasn't shot below 35% since he went to Dallas in 2019. Obviously, he was with the Knicks and the Hawks for various stints before then. It had some up and down shooting years, but the last 5-6 years, he's been between 35 and 39%, and I think he'll be right around there again. You're hoping for high 30s, but like I said, he's a guy that'll compete with Julian Strawther probably for the backup 2-3 wing spot. That'll be interesting to see how those guys perform throughout the season, how their minutes and roles fluctuate. That'll be fun to watch for this new look coaching staff as well, which you should mention the Nuggets have made some interesting additions to the coaching staff, some more official than others are more concrete. JJ Barea looks like he's going to be one of the top assistants. Seems like they're trying to get Jared Dudley on the staff as well, who is also in Dallas as an assistant. And then Rodney Billups as well, who's been with the organization and is obviously a Denver native and is coached at DU and has had various different stops throughout his basketball life. So it seems like DA David Adams is really leaning into the players first, or the players coach kind of coaching staff. Just wanted to quickly mention that. What's your take on the coaches there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Two former point guards in Rodney Billups and JJ Barea. Obviously, Jared Dudley would break that mold a little bit, but I think I saw you post something earlier about I was kind of thinking DA would hire a lead assistant with head coaching experience. And it feels like they're kind of targeting Jared Dudley to be that guy. And I feel like he's been on kind of I don't know if he's interviewed for head coaching positions, but he's kind of been in that mix. So if they're not going to go with a guy who has previous head coaching experience, getting a guy who's kind of on the precipice of potentially becoming a head coach sooner than later, I think is really important. And so, yeah, I mean, like JJ obviously has a ton of NBA experience as a player. Rodney was an assistant to Chauncey in Portland, and I think was a net scout last year. But he was at Ball Arena, felt like every home game he was around. Yeah. So he's definitely very familiar with the franchise. And one of the things I wasn't really sure about is, I thought it would make sense for the Nuggets to hire an assistant with head coaching experience. But I'm just not sure, from like a contract situation, if how willing ownership was to kind of shell out to make sure it's this, star-studded or deeply experienced core of assistants. So, assuming that was the case, I feel like the Nuggets have done pretty well to, bolster the amount of experience that's on that coaching staff.
Speaking of ownership willing to shell out money, it seems like the Nuggets still have work they could do. The roster is almost set in stone at this point. I think they've got 14 guys under contract right now. Should all those deals kind of go through, and then a couple guys I think on the 3 two-ways. Is Spencer Jones one of them? And were any of the other two-ways official yet or reported?
Tamar Bates on draft night out of Missouri, and like Spencer Jones isn't official yet. He was the only one of the 3 who received a qualifying offer.
Right.
So assuming, I don't think there's going to be a team out there that offers him a standard contract. So I would assume it's, between if he wants to explore a two-way option elsewhere or stick with the Nuggets, I think it'll be Spencer's choice on that regard. But I'm kind of operating on the assumption that 2 of those 3 two-way spots are spoken for between Tamar and Spencer.
So 1 two-way spot and 1 regular roster spot. And the Nuggets, if those deals kind of, as we talked about, are as reported as minimum deals for Bruce and Tim Hardaway Jr., that means the Nuggets still have the taxpayer mid-level exception and the biannual exception left they could use, which both of those are between $5 and $6 million for next season. And the Nuggets, and I mentioned earlier that the Cam Johnson and Jonas Valanciunas trades will probably be combined into one, because I saw Bobby Marks say on Twitter that if they weren't combined into one, the Nuggets would be hard capped at the first apron, which I think they would be just under at this point, and then wouldn't be able to use either of the exceptions. They would have to fill out the roster with another minimum guy, and not even like a really veteran guy, because that would only be like $2 million they'd have left to spend. So assuming that trade is combined into one trade, the Nuggets will be at around $193 million for next season, with the first apron at $194 $196 million, just under $196 million, and then the second apron is like $207 million, which they can't get there unless there's some other kind of trades that I just don't see that happening. But like I said, one roster spot left to fill. Anybody like what do you think they'll be aggressive in filling that spot, or with the kind of a key veteran that could fill out the bench? Because I mean, it feels like right now they've got a really solid rotation of 9 guys, which I as a kind of a playoff rotation, which I tweeted out, which was obviously Murray, Brown, Cam Johnson, Gordon, Jokic is starting 5, Bruce Brown, Valanciunas, Peyton Watson, Tim Hardaway Jr. off the bench. You could throw Julian Strawther into that mix. Deron Holmes, we'll see what he looks like as a rookie. Jalen Pickett's still around. Zeke Naji is still somehow on the roster, and I think that might be a guy they might not be able to get off of now that they don't have a pick to trade. But Hunter Tyson as well fills out the roster right now. I mean, just kind of what do you feel like if they do try to fill that roster spot with the guy that they might count on for next year? What do you think they might be looking for with the free agents that are left over?
Yeah, and so right now I think it's pretty interesting in that a lot of there's competition even for those number 2 positions. I think Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to be able to push Julian Strawther and Peyton Watson. He can play the 2 or the 3. So if one of those guys is not performing up to par, Tim is going to get those minutes. So I think they could use somebody who could kind of push and challenge Jalen in the same way. I mean, that could also be Bruce in terms, being a backup point guard. If Tim can challenge Julian and Peyton for minutes, Bruce can challenge Jalen and Julian for minutes, being able to play the 1 or the 2. So yeah, I guess if there was one hole, I would maybe try for a veteran, maybe more true point guard, just to bring a little bit more balance there. But I guess I also wouldn't be surprised if there's not a player they like in that, $5 to $6 million range. I wouldn't be shocked if the Nuggets start next season with a 14-man roster, just to give them that flexibility later on in the season. And then I guess, if things go well enough, that would also give them an opportunity to kind of duck the repeater tax because, to your point, right now, I think it'd have to be a young player on a minimum contract. That would be the only way for them to sign somebody and stay under the first apron. I think, we're all trying to still figure out just how teams are navigating these aprons. The second apron feels more and more like it's serving as a hard cap for some of these teams, especially for a team like Boston, who's going to kind of have that gap year. Phoenix, I'm not sure if they're still going to be in there, or I feel like Cleveland's stuck there. But in terms of what this roster is missing, I feel like you've kind of got multiple guys who can answer the bell at just about every position. I guess I wouldn't be shocked if they start next season with 14 and try to maintain as much flexibility as they can, just to put out a fire should it arise somewhere in the course of the regular season.
Yeah, just some names that are still free agents, like maybe Spencer Dinwiddie. Obviously a CU guy could be interesting as a point guard, although he might be looking for a bigger role somewhere else. Seth Curry, old friend Monte Morris as a free agent, Jalon Wright. There's plenty of guys, veterans out there that the Nuggets, should they want to fill that spot and potentially go over the first apron, they could fill out the roster with. And like I said, that'll be interesting to see what ownership, the kind of faith that ownership has in this new look front office to commit that kind of money to next year's roster. But it feels like they're really going for it. And committing to at least the next 2 years, with Cam Johnson under contract for the next 2 years, committing to this group as trying to compete as best as possible for however long Nikola Jokic's prime lasts, which feels like it could be another 5 years if he keeps playing the way he has. So just a fascinating offseason so far for the Nuggets, and kind of a home run, it feels like, so far, with just given kind of the constraints felt like going into the offseason. Not really too much to complain about for the Nuggets. I mean, just are you kind of at this point, even only about 24 hours into free agency, just kind of blown away with how well they've been able to do so far?
Yeah, especially with a front office that was announced formally 8-9 days ago.
Yeah.
So I mean, it feels like they kind of, Ben Tenzer had to kind of be formulating this plan for a while. I think him and John Wallace are pretty close. So maybe they had a little bit of a head start in terms of, maybe they knew this is they were going to be kind of hired together to run this thing, a week or so before. it was formally announced, but the way they've kind of stepped in and immediately revamped this roster in a way, like I frankly didn't think it was possible. I didn't think they were going to be able to move off of Mike, get a quality player in return, and free up some money there. Like starting yesterday, I wouldn't have been shocked if Bruce was back, but it was on the taxpayer mid-level. Get him on a minimum, get Tim Hardaway on a minimum, Saric for Jonas. Like it just feels like most of these moves are kind of like no-brainers. So yeah, I'm really pretty impressed with the work Ben and John have been able to do in short order.
Before we get out of here, I just want to get some of your overall takeaways from free agency so far throughout the league, because here in the Mountain Time Zone, Utah not really doing anything besides buying out Jordan Clarkson and salary dumping Colin Sexton for Yusuf Nurkic in kind of the puzzling moves. And the Suns are just kind of filling out some fringe rotation guys with bringing back Colin Gillespie, which obviously you and I got to know him a little bit here in Denver, good guy. And they did bring not Wisconsin legend Nigel Hayes-Davis back from he was a EuroLeague champion, played for Fenerbahce and Turkey this past year, had a really great season. So looks like he's coming back to the NBA on a fully guaranteed deal. So some fringe moves for the Suns and Jazz here in the time zone. But anything else stand out to you so far across the NBA? I mean, the Lakers are always a big topic, and they haven't done much yet. You mentioned Boston kind of really shedding salary and losing some guys, losing some key guys over the past week or so. Anything else stick out to you?
I mean, I really like what Atlanta's done.
Yeah.
Like it feels like they're kind of sensing that, next year is going to be an opportunity to kind of go for it in the Eastern Conference. Certainly interesting move between Indiana and Milwaukee. Indiana like ducking the tax and Milwaukee waving and stretching. How many millions of dollars? Like,
over 100 million, yeah, for sure.
Over like 5 years? Like
it's going to be like a $22 million cap hit over the next 5 years for Damian Lillard, which doesn't sound awesome for Milwaukee, especially considering that's probably the rest of Giannis's prime. But I mean, like you said, with bringing in Miles Turner on that 4-year deal, it looks like they're at least for next year going for it again with Giannis. But I mean, one of my friends sent me a graphic of the Bucks projected starting lineup for next season with kind of the throwing up emoji with Kyle Kuzma and Kevin Porter and Gary Trent as alongside Giannis and Miles Turner. So Giannis is going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting for Milwaukee next year if they're trying to compete in a admittedly bad Eastern Conference. But yeah, it's been interesting to see how the East is trying to. Certain teams are definitely going for it as opposed to others in the West that seem to be scaling back a little bit or not being as aggressive. Except San Antonio, I liked Luke Cornett. That kind of deal was interesting. But we'll see what I think. Seems like both the Warriors and the Lakers are in it for Al Horford right now as trying to fill out roster spots. Grizzlies have made some interesting moves, bringing in some guys. They brought in Ty Jerome, and obviously they made the Desmond Bane trade a couple weeks ago, but and they brought back Santi Aldama and gave Jaren Jackson a huge extension. So we'll see what happens over the rest of the week. But here in Denver, it's been an interesting offseason so far, and one that neither's predicted. But I appreciate you coming on, Vinny, to break it all down here after the first day or so.
I lost you there for a second.
Oh, you're back. Just thanks again for coming on. Just after the first day or so of free agency here, been an interesting one.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, that'll do it from today's episode of Basketball in the Mountains. Today was episode 29. Thanks again to Vinny, my colleague Vinny Bandino, for coming on to talk all things Nuggets. After a big shakeup here in Denver with Cam Johnson coming in for Michael Porter Jr. and the new look Denver front office filling out the bench in some unique ways, but in some, as Vinny mentioned, some no-brainer moves. And feels like the Nuggets have quickly retooled going into next season as they look to compete and dethrone the Oklahoma City Thunder, the recent champions. So thanks everyone again for listening. If you missed last episode, we talked about the draft after the first round and all the moves that Utah and Phoenix made. Now Denver gets the spotlight this week here in free agency. So make sure to check all of that out on the feed on Apple or Spotify. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We got the video episodes up on Spotify now every time, as well as on my YouTube channel if you prefer to watch on there. Make sure to like, subscribe to the channel, all of that, comment, all of that is super appreciated by me. So thanks again for Vinny coming on, and thanks to all of you for listening.